The morning my wife left me stranded in a gas station parking lot in Birmingham, Alabama, while she and her friends drove off laughing, I told myself it was a misunderstanding. That's the thing about a man who loves someone too much. He will manufacture reasons to forgive the unforgivable until the evidence is so overwhelming, so undeniable, so stacked against him that even he cannot look away from it anymore. My name is Derek Calloway. I'm 46 years old. I've been a real estate attorney in Macon, Georgia for going on 18 years now. I've negotiated contracts worth millions of dollars. I've sat across from some of the most aggressive opposing counsel in the state and never flinched. But the people who nearly broke me weren't adversaries in a courtroom. They were sitting at my dinner table, sleeping in my house, and calling themselves family. This is the story of what happened when I stopped making excuses, stopped absorbing the humiliation, and decided that enough was enough. And I promise you, by the time I'm done, you're going to understand exactly why the night my mother-in-law slapped me in front of 30 people at a restaurant in downtown Macon was the best thing that ever happened to me. Because what was waiting for them when they got home changed everything. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. If this story speaks to you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Now, let's continue. Let me take you back to where this really started. Not the dinner, not the slap. That came later. This started on a Saturday in March, about 14 months before everything came apart. Camille and I had been married for 9 years at that point. She was 38, and I want to be clear about something before I describe her, because this story is not about tearing down a woman. It's about the truth. Camille was beautiful in a way that made people stop mid-sentence. Tall, with dark eyes, and this particular laugh that she saved for certain moments. And when it came out, you felt like you'd won something. I fell in love with her at a law conference in Atlanta. She was there representing her company's interests in a contract dispute, and I was there as opposing counsel. We were supposed to be adversaries, but by the second day, she was the only person in the room I wanted to talk to. We dated for 2 years before I proposed. I took her to Savannah, to this little restaurant on the river where they light candles in the windows at dusk, and you can hear the water moving below the floor. I had the ring in my jacket pocket for 4 hours before I finally worked up the nerve. She said yes before I finished the sentence. What I didn't fully understand back then was that Camille came with a team. Her mother, Rhonda, was 61 years old and had never once in her life been told no by anyone she loved. She was the kind of woman who filled every room she entered, not because she was particularly warm or charming, but because she demanded space. Her personality operated on a principle I'd call aggressive generosity, meaning she would do enormous, expensive, showy things for you, and then remind you of those things at every inconvenient moment for the rest of your natural life. Camille's best friends, Trish and Nadine, were 2 women I had tried, genuinely tried, to get along with for the better part of a decade. Trish was Camille's college roommate, sharp-tongued, competitive, and possessed of a particular talent for making backhanded compliments sound like high praise. Nadine was quieter, but more calculated. She had a way of planting small seeds of doubt in conversations, and then stepping back to watch them grow. The 3 of them together were a closed system. They had their own language, their own references, their own history. And from the very beginning of my marriage, I had the feeling that I was a recurring character in their story, rather than the lead in my own. I managed. That's the honest word. I managed the dynamic for 9 years. I was patient when Rhonda showed up unannounced. I was good-humored when Trish made her little comments. I was diplomatic when Nadine's suggestions to Camille about everything from our finances to our vacation plans always somehow ended up being implemented. I told myself this was what it meant to be a husband, that you absorb certain things because you love someone and their people are part of the package. Then came March. Camille's company had a regional conference in Birmingham. 2 days, 1 night, nice hotel. She asked if I wanted to come along for the weekend, make a little trip of it. I said yes. Trish and Nadine were going too, so it would be the 4 of us, which I was not thrilled about. But again, I managed. The conference ended Saturday afternoon. We had dinner downtown, good food, easy conversation. For a few hours it genuinely felt like the version of my marriage I had always wanted. Camille was happy, relaxed, laughing at my jokes, putting her hand on my arm. Trish and Nadine were tolerable when they weren't in their private frequency with Camille. We walked back to the hotel around 9. Sunday morning, I woke up at 7 to go down to the hotel gym. I left Camille asleep and went and worked out for about 45 minutes. I showered downstairs, grabbed a coffee from the lobby, and came back up. The room was empty. Her suitcase was gone. Her toiletries, gone. The note on the pillow said, "We're getting an early start. Trish needed to beat traffic. Your stuff is at the front desk." I read that note 3 times. I went down to the front desk. They handed me my car key and a hotel receipt with my name on it, paid in full. My suitcase was behind the counter. I walked outside into the Birmingham morning and stood in the parking lot and understood, slowly and with a specific kind of devastation, that my wife had checked out of the hotel, loaded her things and her friends into the car, and driven back to Georgia. Without me. I want you to sit with that for a moment. Not because I need your sympathy, though I won't pretend the moment didn't cut deep. I want you to sit with it, because I need you to understand the psychology of what I did next. I called her. She answered on the 3rd ring, and her voice was bright, almost amused. "Oh, hey. You were still asleep, and Trish really needed to get back. You have your keys, right?" They left them at the desk. I said yes. I said okay. I said I would figure out the drive back. I did not say what was actually happening inside me, which was a kind of cold, clarifying fury I had never felt before in my life, the kind that doesn't yell, the kind that settles. I drove back to Macon alone, 5 hours. I stopped once for gas just outside Anniston, and I sat in that parking lot for maybe 20 minutes drinking a bottle of water and looking at my phone. I had 17 years of case files in my head from all the divorces and property disputes I'd handled. And for the first time, I found myself applying that professional lens to my own life. When I pulled into our driveway in Macon that Sunday afternoon, Camille's car was already there. She and Trish were on the back porch with wine. Nadine had apparently gone home. They looked up when I came around the side of the house, and Camille said, "There you are," like I was the one who had been somewhere unexpected. I want to be honest with you about this part of the story, because this is where a lot of men either blow up or collapse, and I did neither. I put my bag down, I got a glass of water, and I sat down at the kitchen table and I thought. That's all I did. I thought for a very long time. Something had shifted on the highway between Birmingham and Macon. Not my love for Camille, not yet. But my tolerance for being managed had reached some kind of limit. A quiet, internal limit that didn't announce itself with drama. It just settled into place like a combination lock clicking into the right position. I didn't bring it up that night. I didn't bring it up the next day. I went to work Monday morning and I did my job and I came home and I was civil and present and calm. I was paying attention now. Not to build a case. I wasn't thinking in terms of consequences yet. I was just finally, after 9 years, actually seeing what was in front of me. Over the next 6 weeks, I saw quite a lot. I saw that Camille consulted Trish before she consulted me on anything of consequence. A decision about refinancing the house. A question about whether to take a new position her company was offering. A situation with her niece that required some family navigation. All of it went to Trish first, and then to Nadine, and eventually filtered down to me as a conclusion, rather than a conversation. I saw that Rhonda called 3, sometimes 4 times a week, and that after each call, Camille would be distant for the rest of the evening in a way that I'd spent 9 years attributing to stress or fatigue, but now recognized as something else entirely. Those calls were managing Camille's perspective on her marriage. On me. I saw that when Camille laughed at the stories Trish told about her husband Warren. Stories that always involved Warren being slow or clueless or mildly pathetic in some domestic situation. She laughed a little too freely. A little too knowingly. And I started to wonder how often I appeared in the stories Camille told them about me. I am a real estate attorney. I make a good living. I work 60-hour weeks when I have to, and I coach youth baseball on Saturday mornings. And I have never once in 9 years of marriage forgotten an anniversary, or shown up without groceries when it was my week to shop. I am not a perfect man, but I am a man who showed up. And the people in my wife's life had spent years quietly, systematically reframing that as ordinary, as nothing special, as simply what a husband was supposed to do with nothing owed in return. I started keeping notes, not because I was planning something, because I'm an attorney and I process things by writing them down. Dates, observations, patterns, things that had happened over the years that I'd dismissed and could now see more clearly. The note-taking was not a strategy. It was a form of clarity, but it would turn out to be useful. The dinner happened on a Friday night in late May. Rhonda was in town for the week. She did this 3 or 4 times a year, staying in the guest room of our house, a house I had paid for, that I had picked out, whose mortgage I covered entirely because Camille's income went primarily into her investment accounts, an arrangement I had happily agreed to because I believed in building for our future together. Rhonda did not like me. I want to be precise about this because I think the word dislike is too mild. Rhonda had a fundamental contempt for me that she had been coating in a thin veneer of civility for 9 years. She thought her daughter had married beneath her. Not financially, because she understood I made good money. Beneath her socially. Beneath her culturally. Beneath whatever standard Rhonda had in her mind for the kind of man who deserved Camille. I had never confronted this directly because Camille always smoothed it over, always found the diplomatic bridge, always managed to make me feel like I was perhaps misreading things. Until the dinner. We went to Sullivan's, which is a restaurant on 2nd Street in downtown Macon that does Southern-style fine dining. White tablecloths, good bourbon list, the kind of place where the lighting is warm and everyone is dressed nicely. Camille had made a reservation for 6. Her parents, Rhonda and her husband Gerald, Camille and me, and Trish and her husband Warren. Gerald I liked. Gerald was a retired engineer from Columbia, South Carolina, a quiet, dry-humored man who appreciated a good steak and had long ago learned to navigate the space he occupied beside Rhonda with a kind of graceful silence. We'd always gotten along fine. The evening started well enough. We ordered drinks, looked at menus, made conversation about Gerald's recent fishing trip and Warren's new car. Rhonda was in a particular mood, what I had learned to identify as performative graciousness, meaning she was very charming to everyone in a way that required an audience and created an implicit debt. She complimented the restaurant as if she'd chosen it. She directed the waiter with a confidence that suggested she was hosting rather than attending. I excused myself to go to the restroom about 40 minutes in. On my way back to the table, I misjudged the spacing between 2 chairs. A completely ordinary restaurant moment, and the edge of my hand caught the strap of Rhonda's purse where it hung on the back of her seat. The purse shifted. It did not fall. A small splash of her red wine hit the sleeve of her dress. I said I was sorry immediately. I reached out to steady the glass. I said it again. "I'm so sorry, Rhonda. Let me get some napkins." What happened next took maybe 4 seconds, but I have replayed it so many times in my mind that it feels like it lasted an hour. Rhonda stood up from her chair. She raised her right hand, and she slapped me across the left side of my face, hard enough that the table beside us went quiet. And then, in a voice that was perfectly, chillingly controlled, she said, "How dare you touch me, you disgusting man? Look at my dress. Clean it up and get out." The table was silent. Gerald had gone very still. Trish and Warren were frozen. I stood there with my hand going to my face, not from pain, though it did hurt, but from the sheer disorientation of what had just happened. And then Camille spoke. I will carry what she said for the rest of my life, because it is the sentence that ended my marriage, not the slap, not the abandonment in Birmingham, not any of it. It was this: Derek, apologize to her or leave. Not to Rhonda, to me. My wife looked at me and told me to apologize for being slapped in a restaurant or remove myself from the building. I looked at Camille for a long moment. I looked at Gerald, who could not hold my eyes. I looked at Rhonda, who was pressing a napkin to her sleeve with the expression of a woman who had just won something. I put my napkin on the table. I picked up my jacket from my chair. I said, very quietly, "Good night." And I walked out of Sullivan's. I sat in my car in the parking lot for about 10 minutes. The left side of my face was warm. I could hear the sound of the street, a Friday night in downtown Macon, people moving between restaurants, music coming from somewhere. Normal life going on all around me, completely indifferent to the thing that had just occurred. I drove home. And here is where I need to tell you something important about the next 3 hours, because this is not a story about rage. This is a story about clarity. The decision I made when I got home was not emotional. It was not reactive. It was the most considered, deliberate decision I have made in my adult life. I went to my home office and I called my colleague, Pamela, who is the best family law attorney I know personally, and who I had in fact referred several clients to over the years. I told her what had happened, not just that night, but the accumulation of it. The Birmingham trip. The years of pattern I'd finally started seeing. The slap. Camille's response. Pamela said, "Derek, how long have you been ready to do this?" I said, "I think a few months. I just didn't want to admit it." She said, "I'll start the paperwork Monday. But you need to know your financial position first." I said, "I already know it." Because I did. I'm a real estate attorney. I know exactly how assets work. I know what marital property means, what separate property means, what documentation is required, what can be moved and what cannot. I had not been strategizing. I had been paying attention. And somewhere in those weeks of paying attention, I had already begun to understand the shape of what was coming. I called my brother Terrell next. Terrell is 4 years older than me, lives in Savannah, and is the least dramatic person I have ever known. I told him what happened. He said, "You know what you're doing. I'll come up tomorrow morning." I spent the rest of the night organizing. I pulled together financial records, account statements, documents related to the house. I photographed the interior of the house in a systematic way, room by room, because I wanted a record of its contents. I wrote a detailed, time-stamped account of the evening at Sullivan's, including the names of every witness present, which I sent to myself in a certified email as a record. I did not pack Camille's things. I did not move anything that wasn't mine. I am not a vindictive man, but I am a prepared one. I then went to the guest room, because I was not going to sleep in my bedroom knowing Rhonda would be returning to sleep down the hall, and I got about 4 hours of sleep. When Terrell arrived Saturday morning, we sat in the kitchen and I walked him through everything. He listened the way Terrell always listens, without interruption, with complete attention. When I finished, he said, "What do you need from me?" I said, "I need you to help me move some things. Not tonight. Tonight is important, but next week." He nodded. I also made 2 other phone calls that morning that were critical to what came next. The first was to Pamela again, to begin the formal process of legal separation under Georgia law. Georgia is a no-fault divorce state, but Pamela advised me that the documentation of events, including what witnesses could attest to at the restaurant, would be relevant for specific asset determinations. I will not get into the legal details here, but I will tell you that 9 years of mortgage payments, made entirely by one spouse from a separately held account, carries significant weight in Georgia property law. The house I had chosen and paid for was going to remain the house I chose and paid for. The second call was to the property manager of a furnished apartment complex on Riverside Drive here in Macon. I had represented the complex's owner in a commercial transaction 2 years prior, and I had stayed familiar with the building because I referred clients to it during difficult transitions. I had toured one of the units last week, for reasons I was only now fully admitting to myself. I secured the apartment. Then I waited. Camille, Rhonda, Trish, and Warren came home Saturday afternoon. I was in the living room with a legal pad and a cup of coffee, and I was calm. I want to emphasize this. I was not cold. I was not distant. I was not performing detachment. I was genuinely calm because the decision had already been made, and I no longer needed to brace myself against anything. Rhonda walked in first, and when she saw me, something shifted in her expression. She had probably expected either a submissive husband ready to grovel or an absent one who had not come home at all. She had not expected this. A man sitting quietly in his own house with the settled energy of someone who has already finished the hard thinking. Camille came in behind her and stopped when she saw me. I said, "We need to talk." "Not tonight. Tonight I want you to enjoy your mother's last evening here. But tomorrow, after she leaves, you and I are going to have a conversation." Camille said, "Derek, about last night." "I want to explain." I said, "Tomorrow." Rhonda said something. I don't remember precisely what, something designed to reassert her authority in the room. I looked at her and I said, "Rhonda, I would appreciate it if you would stay out of a conversation between my wife and me." She blinked. Literally blinked, because I do not think in 9 years I had ever said anything to her that wasn't accommodating. I picked up my legal pad and went to my office. The conversation I had with Camille on Sunday after Rhonda left was the most honest one we had ever had in 9 years of marriage. It was not a fight. There were moments when Camille cried, and I sat with that. I didn't try to fix it or minimize it. But I told her the truth. I told her about Birmingham and what it meant, not just as an incident, but as a symptom of a pattern I should have named years ago. I told her about the years of watching her consult Trish and Nadine before consulting me. I told her about Rhonda, about the way Rhonda spoke about me in my own house, about what had happened at Sullivan's and what she had said in response. She said she was upset. She didn't mean to. I said, "Camille, she hit me." A long silence. She said, "I should have said something." I said, "Yes, you should have. And when you didn't, you told me something about where I stand in this marriage, and I have to be honest with you about what I'm going to do with that." I told her I had retained Pamela. I told her that I had already spoken with a property management company and would be transitioning to a separate residence. I told her that nothing in the house would be removed that wasn't mine to take, that I intended to be fair and straightforward throughout the process, and that I expected the same from her. Camille sat very still for a long time. Then she said, "You planned this." I said, "I made decisions. There's a difference." She said, "When?" I said, "It's been coming for a while. Birmingham made it clear. Last night made it final." What I did not say, but what was also true, was this. The planning was not about punishing her. I'm not built that way. The planning was about protecting myself, which I had consistently failed to do for the better part of a decade, and which I had decided I was no longer willing to neglect. I moved into the Riverside Drive apartment the following Friday. Terrell helped me. We took my clothes, my books, my personal items, my office equipment, the toolbox my father had left me, and the television from the bedroom, which I had purchased. I left the house in genuinely good condition. I left Camille's belongings completely untouched. What I also left, which Camille discovered within 48 hours of my departure, was the absence of my income from the joint account. Let me explain this carefully, because I want you to understand it was done correctly and legally, and with full documentation, not as a move against Camille, but as a necessary separation of financial entanglement. For 9 years, my salary had been the primary operational income of our household. Camille's income, by mutual agreement, had gone into her investment portfolio. This had always felt equitable to me in the context of a marriage I believed in. But a separation requires establishing separate financial lives, and Pamela had been very clear about what steps needed to happen immediately. The joint account remained open. My ongoing contributions to it did not. Camille called me on Monday morning. She said, "Derek, there's a problem with the account." I said, "I know. Pamela will be in touch with your attorney to discuss the financial transition." She said, "This is extreme." I said, "What happened at Sullivan's was extreme. My response is proportionate." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You've changed." I said, "Camille, I got slapped in a restaurant by your mother, and you told me to apologize or leave. I chose to leave. I'm still leaving. That's not a change. That's a conclusion. Here is what I want to tell you now, because this is the part of the story that matters." Over the 4 months that followed, a few things happened that I did not expect. The first was Trish. About 3 weeks after I moved out, I got a text from Warren. Warren and I had always had a cordial relationship, the easy alliance of two men who had both ended up in the orbit of the same social group, and therefore had a mutual interest in maintaining a basic cooperative peace. The text said simply, "Can we get lunch?" We met at a barbecue place in downtown Macon, and Warren told me something I will always be grateful he told me. He said, "I want you to know that I saw what happened, and I want you to know that I told Trish that what Rhonda did was wrong, and that what Camille said was worse." He looked at his food for a moment. "You deserved better than that, Derek. I'm sorry I didn't say so at the table." I said, "Why didn't you?" He said, "Because I've been not saying things for a long time." He gave me a look that I understood completely. His marriage to Trish was not a simple thing, and I was not going to make assumptions about the choices he made within it. But I heard what he was telling me. I said, "Warren, you don't need to apologize for another person's actions." He said, "I know. I just wanted you to know. Someone saw it." That lunch meant more to me than I can adequately explain. The second thing that happened was Gerald. Gerald drove up from Columbia, South Carolina, on a Saturday in July and called me from the parking lot of a coffee shop on Vineville Avenue. He said, "I know this might be strange. You can say no, but I wanted to talk to you." I said, "I'll be there in 15 minutes. Gerald is a man of exceptional restraint and economy of language. He does not waste words. He told me, in about 12 sentences, that what had happened at Sullivan's had been the culmination of a pattern he had witnessed for years and been unable to stop. That he had spoken to Rhonda, seriously, for the first time about the way she treated me. That he did not know what it would accomplish, but that it needed to be said. He said, "I want you to know you were always a good husband to my daughter. Rhonda made your life harder than it needed to be, and Camille let her. That's not your failure." I thanked him. We finished our coffee. He drove back to South Carolina. I sat in that parking lot for a while after he left, and I let myself feel what I hadn't let myself feel throughout all of it. Not anger, something closer to grief. For the marriage I had wanted, for the 9 years of trying, for the man I had been in that restaurant who had finally drawn the only line that was left to draw. The divorce was finalized 7 months after I moved out. Georgia law requires a waiting period, and there were asset negotiations that took time, but everything was handled without litigation, which I am grateful for. The house went with me, as the financial record supported. Camille retained her investment accounts, which were substantial, and which she had every right to. We divided the joint account evenly. Pamela called it one of the cleaner high-asset separations she'd handled. I do not know what Camille's life looks like now. We do not communicate except through attorneys when necessary. I hope she is doing well. I mean that. I am not carrying bitterness about Camille. What I carry is the clarity that I should have found years earlier. Rhonda issued a formal letter of apology through Camille's attorney 2 months into the process. Her attorney described it as a recognition that physical contact had been inappropriate. I sent back a one-line acknowledgement through Pamela. That was all. Here is what I know now, 14 months removed from that parking lot in Birmingham, where I first understood that something needed to change. I know that I spent 9 years confusing endurance with love. They are not the same thing. Love is generous, yes. Love accommodates. Love adjusts. But love does not require you to absorb disrespect indefinitely on the premise that the relationship is worth protecting. Because at some point, what you are protecting is not the relationship. It is the structure, the appearance, the comfortable story you have told yourself about what your life is. I know that the hardest part was not the slap, and not the legal process, and not telling my father I was getting divorced. The hardest part was the moment in the car on the way back from Birmingham when I understood what I was going to have to do. Because it meant admitting that I had known for a long time and had chosen comfort over truth. I know that the apartment on Riverside Drive is the most peaceful place I have ever lived. I know that on Saturday mornings I still coach youth baseball, and that none of those kids know or care anything about what happened in a restaurant on 2nd Street, and that standing on that field is the best part of my week. And I know, with more certainty than almost anything else in my life, that the moment I walked out of Sullivan's was not the moment my life fell apart. It was the moment I finally started building the one I should have had all along. You know what hit me hardest about Derek's story? It wasn't the slap. It wasn't even being left in that parking lot in Birmingham. It was the fact that he knew something was wrong for years, and kept finding reasons to stay quiet about it. And I think a lot of us do that. We call it patience. We call it being the bigger person. But sometimes, it's just fear of admitting that the life you built isn't the life you actually have. Derek didn't blow up. He got clear. And that's the part I want you to think about. Drop a comment. What's one thing you've been tolerating that you know you shouldn't? I read every single one. And if you're not subscribed yet, what are you waiting for? I'll see you in the next one.